And we interrupt that story, take you live to the Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
States and territories than to keep Australians safe. After the devastating Black Summer bushfires, we are still in that summer as we speak. I said some weeks ago now that it would be necessary for us to move forward with a National Royal Commission. At the same time, states and territories are proceeding as we anticipated and as they said they would, and is appropriate with a series of inquiries that they're running at the state and territory level as is appropriate. Today, the Governor-General issued letters patent to establish the National Royal Commission into the Black Summer fires. That Royal Commission is about three things: improving natural disaster management, coordination across all levels of government, improving Australia's resilience and adaptation to a changing climate, living in hotter, longer, drier summers in this country, and importantly, a legal framework, as is necessary for the Commonwealth's involvement in responding to national emergencies. One of the great challenges of the Black Summer fires has been how they impacted on so many different states and indeed territories, often at the same time. We will all remember the day that a state of natural disaster was declared in Victoria. It was on the Thursday, I recall. We'd had the terrible fires that had been raging also through New South Wales to such devastating effect. By that Saturday, 2 days after, we had the first compulsory call-out of the reservists, which saw our numbers increase from 890 to 6,500 in a matter of weeks, when as a Commonwealth we decided to take the initiative and to put more boots on the ground. And I'm sure everyone all over the country that is affected by those fires was so grateful to see those boots on the ground. And I want to thank General Elwood and everyone who's been involved in that operation, which continues to this day, Operation Bushfire Assist, with the way they've been conducting that operation, providing tremendous support to communities and great relief all across the country. The Royal Commission will be led by the former Chief of the Defence Force, Air Chief Marshal Mark Binskin, and he will be supported by two other commissioners, a former Federal Court Judge, the Honourable Dr Annabel Bennett, and by Professor Andrew McIntosh, who is a specialist researcher in climate change mitigation and adaptation. This Royal Commission accepts, it acknowledges, it understands the impact of climate change more broadly on the climatic conditions that Australia is living in. What this Royal Commission is looking at are the practical things that must be done to keep Australians safer and safe in longer, hotter, drier summers, in the conditions in which Australians will live into the future. So that's dealing with the practical things that need to happen on everything from preparation to response and, importantly, recovery. In framing these terms of reference, we circulated and sought comment from the states and territories, and I thank all the premiers and chief ministers for their feedback and input into that process, and we've listened carefully to those responses, and we've made adaptations as necessary to ensure that the Royal Commission will enable the commissioners to look at this issue very much from the position of the national perspective. And that national perspective, as I said, will look at what is the arrangements when you could have a national state of emergency or disaster declared. There is no such power. There is no such declaration that currently exists, and therefore no consequent powers or authorities or actions that would flow from such a declaration. And so it's important to discuss through, particularly when you have natural disasters that are occurring across multiple states, how that would be put in place, what would be the conditions, what would it then do, and how would that integrate and work with the state and territory effort. It's also important, I think, as Australians have said very clearly, that they want a greater national perspective on these issues. And so it is important to ensure that when we're talking about issues like hazard management, hazard reduction, when we're talking about vegetation, native vegetation management, when we're talking about building standards and controls and planning and land use laws, that we have a greater national consistency in our understanding of what the best practice is and what the standards are and what the plans are and what the accountabilities are using common methodologies so Australians can get a national picture of how we're tracking. These are clearly and absolutely and should forever be the responsibilities of states and territories. This isn't about changing who does what. This is about how we work together even more effectively, and we build on the disaster recovery arrangements that have been put in place by previous governments but have been tested on this occasion because of the multiple jurisdiction nature of this disaster. We've also seen across these latest fires some inconsistency in how the application of the various Category A, B and C assistance has been declared in different states and territories. When you're only operating in one state, or there's only one jurisdiction that's been affected, well, those inconsistencies don't present because they're declared by the states. But when you have it happening at Kangaroo Island and you have it happening up in Canungra and you have it happening in Bateman's Bay or East Gippsland at the same time, then obviously it's important that Australians should have the same expectations of the level of support that they might receive in those circumstances. Now, we've worked together to do our best to ensure that has been as consistent as possible. And I make no criticisms at all of the state and territory governments, and in particular those who led the first line of defence, the first response in combating the fires themselves. The volunteer fire brigades, the emergency services departments and all of these organisations. This is an opportunity to have a National Royal Commission which looks at the ways that the national coordination, the national consistency, the national standards, the national measurement and the national powers and authorities that need to be put in place, that those questions can be considered and they can be assessed. Now, it is important that this be done in a very rapid fashion, as the states are also doing. So 6 months has been set aside for this inquiry. It needs to report back by the 31st of August of this year. That will also give them, based on the reporting timetables for the state and territory arrangements, a month to consider the recommendations and the inquiries that have been undertaken at that level. This isn't an inquiry as to whether the truck should have gone down that road or gone down some other road. The states are looking at those operational issues, and that's why it's important that there be close collaboration between this National Royal Commission with the state-based inquiries, particularly that are occurring in New South Wales, South Australia and in Victoria. And I would hope that that would be the case, because the more they work together, the quicker they can get the job done, the quicker the premiers, chief ministers and I and the relevant emergency services and management ministers around the country can get on with the recommendations that they would bring forward. Now, I want to go to one other item on corona before we go to general questions, if that's not inconvenient. I can confirm that 170 people did depart Japan, and they've arrived back in Australia at Darwin, and they are being transferred to Howard Springs. I can confirm the Australian Embassy in Tokyo continues to provide consular support to 47 passengers in Japan who have tested positive to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus.